a government remaining adamant that South African troops will remain in the DRC as part of its peacekeeping mission in that country, despite the death of 13 South African soldiers. The briefing, or should I say briefing the media for the very first time, the Defence Minister with her deputy and the International Relations Minister say they have called on the African Union and the East African community to host a summit to address the ongoing tensions. So let's discuss now the handling of these communications, and to help us do that, I am joined by Teboho Khaas. He is the chairperson of Public Interest South Africa. Mr. Khaas, good afternoon to you, and thank you very much for your time. I know that you are on the road right now. I wonder whether you had the opportunity to watch the communication for the very first time by the Defence Minister, her deputy, and alongside them, our Foreign Affairs Minister, basically Derko. Did you watch that media briefing? And if you did, what was your overall sense?
Not quite watched actually, but certainly I've heard snippets over the radio of what the minister had said in regards to what transpired in Goma in the last couple of days.
Yeah.
And to the extent that she was claiming that, or she reported that the Rwandan were exchanging fire with the Congolese army over the heads of the South African soldiers. I find that very laughable.
So, Mr. Khaas, I think part of the reason why South Africans are glued to TV screens, reading articles about this, is because of the losses that we have suffered as a country in the DRC. And let's not forget that at the center here are families who have lost their children, and for them, they would rather have the government communicate with them first, as opposed to them hearing these kinds of messages through the media. Today, I can tell you about several families that we have spoken to as a channel throughout this particular period. And the frustration, Mr. Khaas, is that their children, at least those who survived, are the ones telling them about their state of health, possibly on hospital beds. In fact, we're actually going to play a soundbite of one of these families before we continue our conversation. Let's just take a listen to this.
I wrote to see Piwe Dlamini. I think this one who's actually feeding us lies on the TV, and I asked him, why is it that they don't communicate with the family? There is no answer, there's no reply to that particular email up to now. And I also wrote to the Speaker of Parliament. No answer up to now. There is just nothing. It's a blanket of silence. We are told that here the ammunition, the resources are sufficient. And then from what we're getting is this is not the situation. So that is lies to us. And in fact, there is a lot of confusion, a blanket of confusion here.
Mr. Khaas, I don't know what your reaction is to that kind of commentary from frustrated families.
Yeah, this is heart-wrenching, totally. I also heard earlier on radio, one of the family members, I think it must have been the mother or an aunt, but probably mother, saying that they haven't heard from their relative, and they only had reports about his friend who has demised, and they haven't been able to reach their loved one over the phone, which they presume he must have also been lost in the crossfire or in the fire exchange. In fact, when they do communicate, which they have been very lacking in communicating, the Defence Force, they actually did an atrocious job in their communication. When they do communicate also, it is also important that they treat the public and the families not as children, because the communication that came up was just so much riddled with a lot more questions were asked than answers provided. For example, they initially gave the spokesperson the benefit of the doubt when it was reported, when they said, I think a day before yesterday, that the reason why our soldiers were raising the flag was just to say to the other side, the M23 rebels, that we're not. We just wanted to let you know that it's okay for you to come and pick up your martyred or the dead soldiers on your end around our base.
Yeah.
And equally, we can also do the same thing. But no sooner had that said, I saw the clip later on in the evening where you could actually hear gunfire directed towards the very same soldiers, South African soldiers, who were hoisting that white flag. And we know that in military or in a battlefield, a red flag means surrender. And you could hear them actually scamper away from the barricades that they erected. So the point I'm trying to make is that it is one thing to communicate late. It is even worse to actually try and twist the truth when people can see the truth, especially in this day and age where videos and material can easily be available to the public. So we really wish government could really take the public seriously and also make sure that they actually return fire with fire, because you can see the only language that the Rwandan and backed M23 rebels, and there are reports that they were actually being supported by the US and Israeli forces, which hasn't been verified. But it is worrisome that our government will just be okay to turn the other cheek and say, we want to negotiate over the dead bodies of 11 or so members of our own soldiers, which we find reprehensible. It doesn't show when force is needed that South Africa will need our commander-in-chief to act forcefully. Let's negotiate after we've returned fire and make sure that we exact the same kind of pain or retribution as the Rwandans and the M23 rebels have done to or have cost us. So it is quite regrettable in terms of how the communication was handled around this.
Yeah. There's one last point. Yeah, please go ahead.
If I may add, incidentally, I also saw a clip today before Parliament. The SIU was appearing before Parliament, actually giving an update on the procurement spend or the malfeasance in the procurement spend or the misuse of public funds by the South African National Defence Force, where referring to the 260 or 230 million odd that was spent on interferon, that so-called snake oil that we bought for COVID from Cuba. You can see that resources are not being allocated or used judiciously. And instead, we see profligacy in the part of the army generals and the senior management, including the previous minister, who ironically appeared in court on the Monday on which the Friday we actually were laying to rest the late Major General Keith Mokwape, who must have turned in his grave when he heard that South African soldiers were subject of an attack largely because they didn't have sufficient ammunition to defend or equipment to defend themselves. The families are actually being let down, the families of the soldiers that we send out on these deployments.
You know, Mr. Khaas, I want to end this discussion on this point, and I really wish you would have seen the press conference, just the handling of it. And let's remember that the Minister of Defense, alongside her colleagues, was communicating for the very first time to the public. I just want you to have a picture of this as I try to paint it to you. So first of all, the cameras go inside the Cabinet Lekgotla at the Union buildings, and President Cyril Ramaphosa seated alongside his deputy, making light moments with the journalists. Perhaps nothing wrong with that, but just the enormity of what the government officials have got to communicate to the South African public. So let's move from that. You then are taken outside as media personnel, where you are told you're going to be addressed by the Minister of Defense, who will be speaking for the very first time. And this is on the sidelines of the Cabinet Lekgotla. There is no room organized, Mr. Khaas. There's no room. And so the three officials have to squeeze next to each other and try to clamor for the microphones. And then you have the communication that is just I'm not going to make a comment on it until you watch it for yourself. But when I paint that picture for you, does that paint a picture of dignity that has to be accorded with this being communicated for the first time?
Not at all, especially if we want to associate it with military exceptionalism. Remember, of the military, we expect precision, exceptionalism. We accept things to be done. When they say military precision, it means everything must be done orderly. It means there was just no order at all in how the communication must have been handled by the minister, from what you're sharing with me, and to actually make sure that there was not even planning as to what exactly and how exactly they're going to be communicating this. Let me tell you, when President Kagame hosts a media briefing or addresses his nation, you can see that things are done orderly. And you can see how he addresses as a matter of fact. And in fact, our president, the commander-in-chief, has been missing since last week, Thursday, when this flare-up started, only to come out of, I don't know where, to come and address us, if indeed that's who we call the commander-in-chief. He doesn't seem to be leading with duty to care about those he commands and send out to in harm's way. And
all right.
Quite honestly, it's regrettable.
Teboho, Khaas, thank you very much for your time, sir.